The state of California is the #1 agricultural producer and exporter in the United States. California farmers grow 350 recognized crops, produce 1 out of every 5 glasses of milk, and harvest most of the grapes consumed in the nation. In 2002, the value of California's agricultural marketings was $27.5 billion. Over the years, California farmers have adopted many new technologies to improve and optimize their production practices. Genetic improvement of domesticated plant and animal species have been carried out very successfully for many decades. In the past decade, genetic engineering has emerged as a new tool that can be used in agriculture. The use of genetic engineering in agricultural food production systems has not been without controversy, and there are many, often conflicting reports regarding the risks and benefits of this technology. The objective of this video is to explain the science behind genetic engineering, to detail the current extent of its use in California agriculture, and examine some of the science-based concerns pertaining to the use of this technology in agricultural production systems. To understand genetic engineering, it is necessary to understand some basic life processes. Living organisms are made up of cells, and located inside the nucleus of each cell is deoxyribonucleic acid, or DNA for short. The entire genetic makeup, or genome, of an organism is stored in 1 or more chromosomes inside each cell. Chromosomes are comprised of intertwined molecules of DNA. DNA contains the instructions for making proteins. A gene is a distinct sequence of DNA that contains both a start and a stop signal, and generally each gene gives rise to a single unique protein. Proteins are essential to the structure and function of plants and animals. You can think of DNA as a set of instructions written in a universal language. Each gene contains the instructions for making a particular protein. The genome is a set of encyclopedias containing the instructions for making tens of thousands of proteins. In general, the DNA from all organisms contains instructions that are written in the same genetic language. Recombinant DNA technology refers to the process in which scientists use molecular scissors to cut out fragments of DNA and then paste them back together. Genetic engineering is the term used to describe the transfer of that recombinant DNA sequence into the genome of a living organism. Organisms formed in this way are referred to in a variety of ways, including genetically modified organisms, or GMOs, as biotech, as transgenic, as genetically engineered, or simply GE. During the process of genetic engineering, instructions for the production of 1 or 2 new proteins are permanently added to the instructions for making the tens of thousands of proteins that are already present in the genomic encyclopedia. Genetically engineered organisms are widely used to produce therapeutic drugs and industrial proteins. For example, the insulin that is used by diabetics has been made by genetically engineered bacteria since 1978. In the past, insulin was purified from the pancreas of cows and pigs. Insulin from these animals differs from the human form of insulin, and this caused some immune reactions and insulin resistance among diabetics using these products. Most insulin in use today is made by recombinant DNA technology and is immunologically equivalent to human insulin. Genetically engineered bacteria and fungi are also routinely used as the source of protein enzymes for the manufacture of a wide variety of processed foods. More than 70% of U.S. hard cheeses are manufactured using a genetically engineered form of rennin, which is responsible for separating the curds from the whey. Before genetic engineering, this enzyme was collected from the stomach lining of calves. Although not commercialized yet, tobacco plants are being used to produce individualized therapeutic vaccines to treat patients with certain types of cancer. And genetically engineered goats have been developed that produce therapeutic proteins in their milk. These medicinal and industrial uses of genetic engineering have been much less controversial than the concerns that have been raised regarding the use of this technology in plants and animals that are used for the production of food.
Genetic engineering allows you to introduce genes or traits from an absolutely unrelated organism. It could be a virus, it could be a bacteria, it could be an animal or a very different plant. And that is both the power of the technology but also a source of concern, because you bring in a novel trait or a novel gene that has not existed within that species, nor in the environment in which that species is normally grown.
As a result of this unique concern, one or more of three separate federal authorities, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the Environmental Protection Agency, and the Food and Drug Administration, review each genetically engineered species encoding a new protein on a case-by-case basis to assess their safety for humans, animals, and the environment. Before a genetically engineered crop can be sold commercially, the USDA requires field testing to answer several questions. After the developer has accumulated several years of data from regulated field trials to address these questions, they can petition the USDA to allow the new genetically engineered variety to be deregulated. Deregulation means the genetically engineered variety will be treated no differently than a variety developed by traditional breeding. The cost of doing all of the trials and safety evaluations required to obtain regulatory approval can run into the millions of dollars. In 1994, the first genetically engineered crop, the Flavor Savor tomato, received federal regulatory approval. To date, genetically engineered varieties of 12 plant species have been deregulated and federally approved for commercial production. Only 6 of these are currently being grown in the U.S. The majority of the commercialized genetically engineered food crops help the farmer to grow the crop, such as varieties that are resistant to insect attacks. A primary example is the use of an insect toxin gene from a naturally occurring soil bacterium, Bacillus thuringiensis. BT has been used by backyard gardeners and commercial farmers for decades as a topical application to protect plants from certain types of insect attack. Scientists took the DNA that makes this protein from the genome of Bacillus thuringiensis. This recombinant DNA sequence was then transferred to different crop varieties. This gene enables genetically engineered plants to produce the BT protein, which protects them from specific insects, such as the corn earworm or cotton bollworm, while having no known effect on other insects or animals. In 2003, the United States grew 106 million acres of genetically engineered crops. And for 2004, it is estimated that 46% of field corn, 54% of canola, 86% of soybeans, and 76% of cottonseed planted was from genetically engineered varieties. Because corn and soy are key ingredients in many processed food products, recent estimates suggest that more than 60% of processed food products on U.S. shelves may contain at least a small quantity of some crop that has been genetically engineered. In the U.S., labeling of genetically engineered food is only required when the food has a detectable difference in nutrition or a higher likelihood of allergic reaction when compared to non-GE food. But since no GE foods currently on the market have these detectable differences, labeling is not required.
The FDA is very concerned about issues of allergenic effects from genetically modified foods, as well as times in which the genetically modified foods might enhance or increase the production of a naturally occurring toxin. So they're very aware of that. The companies developing these products to date have paid a lot of attention to that, have done pre-market testing to ensure that allergenic effects or natural proteins are do not pose toxicological risks, and FDA will review that data before they will approve these types of products.
Consuming DNA is not harmful in any way. Every time we eat a meal, we are consuming cells that contain DNA. During the digestive process, DNA is broken down.
I think what we need to focus on is not so much how the foods are produced, but the safety aspects of the foods. And as a food toxicologist, I'm convinced that the small changes in the compositions of the genetically modified foods, coupled with the large amount of testing that these foods have actually had, lead me to the conclusion that there really aren't differences between the genetically modified foods and the conventionally produced foods in terms of human health.
As with plants, recombinant DNA technology is being used to produce genetically engineered animals for human medicine applications, such as the production of transplantation-friendly pigs that may provide a critically needed source of tissues and organs for human transplantation surgeries. Livestock routinely eat feed such as cottonseed, corn, and soy meal from genetically engineered crops, and they may also be treated with recombinant proteins produced by genetically engineered microbes. However, to date, there are no genetically engineered animals approved for human consumption in the U.S. Additionally, there have never been any food crops on the market containing a DNA sequence derived from animals, such as strawberries containing fish genes.
The federal authority that's in charge of regulating genetically engineered animals is the Food and Drug Administration. The only genetically engineered animal species that has been publicly disclosed to be going through the regulatory review process is a growth-enhanced salmon.
However, in 2003, a genetically engineered zebrafish that produces a red fluorescent protein became commercially available in most U.S. pet shops under the name glowfish. Zebrafish is a small aquarium species that has never become established outside captivity in the U.S., despite repeated intentional and accidental releases. Federally, the FDA determined not to formally regulate glowfish because zebrafish pose, quote, no threat to the food supply, and there is no evidence that genetically engineered red zebrafish pose any more threat to the environment than their widely sold unmodified counterparts. End quote. Despite the FDA's decision not to regulate the commercial sale of glowfish, it is not currently available from pet stores in California.
The glowfish is currently not allowed to be owned in California, and the reason for that is that the California Department of Fish and Game have regulations about the possession of genetically engineered aquatic organisms like fish, and a permit would be required for a person to have the glowfish in their aquarium.
Herbicide-resistant corn and cotton varieties are the most common uses of genetic engineering in California agriculture. These varieties are able to make a protein that enables the plant to survive contact with a particular herbicide or weed killer. An estimated 500,000 acres, or 44% of upland cotton and 50% of field corn planted in California in 2004, was genetically engineered. Small amounts of genetically engineered virus-resistant squash and insect-resistant sweet corn are also grown in the state. While research is ongoing, only a few genetically engineered horticultural crops have reached the market. Herbicide-tolerant varieties of alfalfa, a widely grown forage crop, are currently under development and could also be widely used in the near future. Most of the genetically engineered crops in California are being grown in the San Joaquin Valley. Farmer Don Cameron discusses why he chooses to grow genetically engineered herbicide-tolerant cotton on some of his ranch located in the San Joaquin Valley.
Genetically engineered cotton has been grown here because we find it to be more economical, requires less hand labor. So we're saving probably $100 to $125 per acre in weeding cost. We've been able to keep our fields cleaner over the long term. We use less chemical herbicides and more safer herbicides than we used in the past with the conventional cotton.
It has been estimated that California cotton yields would decrease by 75% if weeds were allowed to grow out of control.
One of the other aspects is that we're able to reduce the number of passes that we run the cultivator or tractor with the cultivator to eliminate the weeds. We're able to spray them and remove them from the field. So we cut down on the dust and the particulates that we're putting into the air. We're reducing diesel emissions by not running the tractor those 2 passes. So we really feel it's an environmental benefit to have the genetically engineered cotton.
Genetically engineered crops may also allow farmers to move to conservation or no-tillage practices where the soil is left undisturbed from harvest to planting. This may be particularly important in the San Joaquin Valley, where erosion and runoff into the delta and poor air quality are major environmental concerns. Farmer John Diener explains why he grows genetically engineered crops on some of the land on his mixed farm in the San Joaquin Valley.
One of the consequences of using genetically modified crops has been given us the opportunity to experiment, utilize minimum tillage, conservation tillage, as well as non-tillage on several different tracts of land that we have. And when you do non-tillage, there are oftentimes insect populations that will be very detrimental to the young crop succeeding it, and without it being genetically modified to resist those particular pests, we would not be successful. And that has been a enhancement to the cost effectiveness as well as the environmental regulations that we see ourselves confronted with here in the Central Valley from the EPA.
Planting genetically engineered crops is also one of the management techniques that farmers can use to comply with the agricultural air pollution abatement requirements of the San Joaquin Valley Air Pollution Control District. In addition to possible environmental benefits, there are also some environmental concerns associated with the use of genetically engineered crops. Particularly important are concerns about cross-pollination or gene flow from genetically engineered crops to non-genetically engineered plants.
So the ecological impact of gene flow has been a concern, I would say, almost since the beginning of the ability of scientists to genetically engineering plants in the beginning of the 1980s, and has continued up to this day. The major crops in California that are genetically engineered are cotton and corn. And fortunately, in this case, there are no wild relatives of either cotton and corn growing in California or elsewhere in the US. So in essence, that eliminates a particular problem associated with gene flow. It does not eliminate those instances in which a cross between a GE variety of these two crops and a non-GE variety of the same crops might be a problem, as in the case of organic agriculture. And there, other measures have to be looked at to avoid that problem, in a sense.
The organic industry represents approximately 1% of California's agricultural marketings.
In California, we have the climatic conditions, the cultural conditions that are almost optimal for organic crop production due to our dry production season in the summer. In most cases, organic produce, vegetable production is greater than field crops.
Certified organic agricultural products are required to be grown in accordance with the standards of the USDA National Organic Program, as detailed in the Organic Food Production Act of 1990.
Organic production is a system of agriculture that emphasizes natural inputs such as animal manure and prohibits synthetic inputs such as synthetic pesticides. It also prohibits the use of any crop development using genetic engineering technologies. It is very difficult to control pollen flow from GE crops to organic crops. One of the things that the organic producer is required to do is establish boundaries, buffers, windbreaks, hedgerows, use methods which would minimize the movement of GE pollen to the organic crop. But we cannot control biology. In the case of this crop behind me, corn, it's a wind-pollinated crop. We cannot control the movement of that corn pollen by wind to another crop in the adjacent area. The National Organic Program rule does not set standards for GE presence in organic produce or organic product. There are no requirements for measuring GE presence in an organic product. Rather, what we'll find is that the market applies their own standards on top of the National Organic Program standards. The National Organic Program standards simply require that the organic producer do their best to minimize the pollen flow from a GE crop. And once that requirement has been achieved, then they have satisfied the requirements of the Act.
On the farm here we have both the organic and the conventional, and with the conventional we do have the genetically engineered cotton. We've been able to keep separation by either buffers or just placing the fields far enough away from each other to where we don't have pollen drift, we don't have cross-pollination between the two, and we've been able to be very successful keeping them separate.
Since different farming systems are employed in California, often on adjoining fields, there is a need to enable the coexistence of different production methods.
Coexistence is the efforts that organic agriculture and conventional agriculture must make together cooperatively in order that both can thrive in the same production region.
On our farm we grow organic crops because more than just growing cotton on our ranch, we grow several different kinds of vegetables. And there's quite a demand within California's processing industry to have organically grown crops. In 1988 we started with CCOF, which is the California Certified Organic Farmers Organization, as our third-party certifier. We do not grow any of the genetically modified crops on our organic land, and we separate those by a distance of about a mile, but when we grow things of similar nature. So if we were to grow corn, we couldn't have corn within a mile or two of our organic corn. In our organic system, we have our crops tested every year by those people that buy those crops from us for any traces of genetically modified organisms. And as such, I have no fear in the ability for a conventional agricultural system to coexist with a certified organic system. We've done it for 7 or 8 years and have the ability to probably continue as long as we use good husbandry practices that isolate GMO crops from contaminating the organic ground.
I really feel that the coexistence between organic, conventional, and genetically engineered crops is important for California. We have a diverse community here in farming. We have niches for really for all different types of farming. We know on our farm that we can coexist. We can have genetically engineered crops, we can have conventional crops, and we can have organic crops. And to take any of those away from us, I think really is a disservice to California agriculture.
So another reason why gene flow still remains a concern up to this day is that there are constantly new products being developed and in the pipeline, so to speak. So in addition to BT and herbicide tolerance, what you see now appearing are, for example, pharmaceutical compounds that are being engineered into crop plants. And those raise also a particular concern in terms of gene flow. And one example would be pharmaceutical rice, which has potentially been proposed for California. Now, clearly, if pharmaceutical rice were to be introduced into California, that would raise a whole series of new concerns, and one would have to take special measures to make sure that the pharmaceutical production would remain absolutely separate from the food production. And that raises the concern, is that possible at all?
Under U.S. regulations, genetically engineered plants that produce proteins for pharmaceutical or industrial uses are not permitted to enter the food supply. and are never able to be deregulated. Another concern with genetically engineered crops is the evolution of resistance.
The experience has been when you introduce a new variety, whether it's genetically engineered or not, is that it has to go with good management practices. And so you can't just rely on that single trait, herbicide tolerance or BT, and hope that that is going to solve all your problems.
You know, we don't look at genetically engineered crops as being a silver bullet in agriculture. We use integrated pest management for insect scouting and any pesticide sprays that we do use. We use crop rotation because if we don't want to see a resistance to a Roundup or any other herbicide on the farm. We look at it as a tool that keeps us competitive worldwide.
Increasingly we see that there are issues that go well beyond I would say the scientific issues of effect on the environment, the effect on human health, and these are more socio-economic, political, as well as legal issues associated with the use of genetic engineering. Particular concern are the intellectual property rights and potential issues of liability. What happens if a transgene crosses or a transgenic variety crosses with a non-genetically engineered variety? What are the issues of liability? And what are the issues of ownership of the genetically engineered material, which is usually patented? Okay. And these issues have not been resolved as yet.
Like genetically engineered plants, genetically engineered animals have potential food safety and environmental concerns.
The greatest science-based concern with genetically engineered animals is the transmission of that genetic information from the genetically engineered animals to native populations. This is analogous really to the pollen drift issue that you see with genetically engineered plants.
In the case of genetically engineered animals, this concern has prompted the development of California regulations governing the possession of genetically engineered fish and a law prohibiting their presence in state waters.
Without strong public trust in the federal regulatory review process, the already complex task of regulating genetically engineered organisms has the potential to become a state or even a local issue, and with that comes the possibility of 50 or more different and possibly conflicting regulatory regimes.
Genetic engineering is a complex issue, and its use in agricultural food production systems has evoked considerable controversy. A number of California farmers see a benefit to using this technology, and they are currently using genetically engineered varieties of cotton and corn in their farming systems, while other farmers have concerns about pollen drift from genetically engineered crops situated in close proximity. To date, there has been no evidence that the genetically engineered foods now on the market pose any human health concerns, or that they are in any way less safe to consume than crops produced through traditional breeding. A regulatory framework is in effect to identify any potential human or environmental risks. As with any technology, neither the risks nor the benefits of genetically engineered organisms are certain or universal. Both may vary according to the season, the year, the species, the introduced gene, and farm management practices. An understanding of the science and uses of genetic engineering is essential to allow for an informed discussion about the possible benefits and the concerns that are associated with the use of this technology in California agriculture.